This canine German Shepherd ran 40 miles back. What he carried will break your heart. He was trained to obey, trained to protect, trained to serve. But when the mission ended and the battlefield grew silent, this loyal canine German Shepherd did something no one expected. He vanished. And 40 miles later, limping and bleeding, he reappeared on the doorstep of a man who hadn't seen him in months. But it wasn't just the distance he crossed that left everyone speechless. It was what he carried in his mouth. What happened next would touch the hearts of hardened soldiers, tearful medics, and even the toughest commanders. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Stay with us until the end, because what this dog did when everyone else had given up will leave you changed forever. The desert air was still, not the stillness of peace, but the kind that comes after something violent. Sergeant Jake Holloway stood with dust in his teeth, blood on his shirt, and a ringing in his ears. The convoy had been ambushed just outside Al-Haditha. A mine buried deep under the surface had torn through the lead vehicle. 2 men gone, 1 missing, and the K9 was gone too. Valor, his partner, a 4-year-old German Shepherd trained to detect explosives, track hostiles, and keep Jake alive. In 4 deployments, Valor had never disobeyed, never hesitated. His instincts were surgical, his focus inhuman. But in the chaos of the ambush, Valor had disappeared. No signal, no bark, no body. Jake searched until night fell. He called, cursed, pleaded, nothing. When they pulled back to the FOB, Jake sat alone with his rifle in his lap and mud dried into his skin. He refused to clean up. He refused to sleep, because Valor wouldn't have run. Not unless he was gone. The base medic tried to reason with him. Jake, if he was caught in the blast, he wouldn't be intact. He'd be. I said he's not dead. Jake snapped. He's trained to find a way back. Always. But 2 days passed. Then 3. The heat rose to 112 degrees. Patrols resumed. Commanders moved on. Jake didn't. He spent each evening staring at the gate, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse from saying one name over and over again, Valor. 40 miles away, through scorching canyons, villages dotted with ruins, and long-forgotten minefields, something moved, a shape low to the ground, staggering, bleeding from a gash in the leg, ears alert but drooping. Valor. His left flank was burned. A piece of shrapnel had torn through his vest, now hanging loose and frayed. His right paw was swollen, possibly fractured, but he kept going, step after step, across rocks, through thorn bushes, past sleeping goats and rusted wreckage. There was something in his mouth, a torn piece of Kevlar, Jake's sleeve, the last piece he had when the explosion separated them. Somewhere in Valor's mind, deep beneath training, beneath memory, a voice, come home boy, and that was all he needed. On the 4th night, a soldier on gate duty thought he saw a shadow near the perimeter. He raised his rifle, called for backup, but what stepped out of the darkness made him drop it to the ground. A German Shepherd, limping, face covered in dried blood, in his mouth Jake Holloway's uniform sleeve. He collapsed before the gate. Jake was woken by shouting. He ran barefoot through the gravel, shirtless, eyes wild. And when he saw the body on the ground, everything in him shattered. Valor. He dropped to his knees. The dog didn't move, just opened one eye. Then Jake's hand. The sleeve dropped from his jaws. Jake pulled the limp body into his arms and cried like a child. Not just from relief. But from awe. The dog had come home, 40 miles through fire and pain, because he remembered what loyalty meant, and he never forgot his mission. Jake didn't sleep that night. He lay on the floor next to Valor in the base's makeshift vet room. His hand never left the dog's side. He carried it. Jake whispered, he carried my sleeve. The whole way back. No one spoke. There was nothing to say, only silence. The kind that comes not after violence, but after something sacred. The military vet, Lieutenant Ramos, had seen a lot during his 8 years. Overseas bomb-sniffing dogs torn open by shrapnel, handlers broken after watching their partners fall, pups that never made it past week 2 of training, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for what she saw when she stepped into the base's emergency animal unit that morning. The dog was half dead, his ribs pressed through his skin like scaffolding, his paw pads were torn, exposing raw muscle. A chunk of his flank was missing fur entirely, replaced by blackened skin and dried blood. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes, those eyes still burned with alertness, like coals refusing to go out. She checked the dog's tag. K9 Valor, Handler, SGT, Holloway Unit, 118th Recon Division. Forward operations. I thought he was lost, she said aloud. He wasn't. Jake's voice answered from the corner of the room. He hadn't slept, his face was drawn, eyes sunken, and a shallow cut on his cheek from the blast was still crusted over. He sat beside Valor like a unflinching, unwilling to let anyone else take control. Ramos knelt beside them. Jake, he needs help. I need you to let me do my job. Jake looked at her. There was pain in his eyes. But trust, too. You save him, he whispered. Whatever it takes. She nodded. Then get out of my way. The next 48 hours were tense. Valor had internal bleeding. A severe infection had begun near the hind leg. He was dehydrated, weak, and his vitals dipped dangerously low on the second night. Ramos worked tirelessly. She set up IV fluids, cleaned the wounds, and gave him antibiotics and pain relief. At one point, she even sang softly to him an old Spanish lullaby her mother used to sing when she was afraid. Jake never left. He ate 1 meal a day. Sometimes, none. He didn't shower. He refused to be reassigned. The base commander, Colonel Reeves, stopped by once, flanked by a staff sergeant. "You're not combat ready," Reeves said bluntly. "We need you on recon." Jake didn't even look at him. "I'm not going anywhere. He's a dog, Holloway." Jake stood, slow and steady. "He's not just a dog. He ran 40 miles to come back, bleeding, broken, carrying a piece of me in his mouth. I don't care what the war demands, I stay with him." Colonel Reeves stared at him. "You know they're reviewing his status?" Jake's expression turned cold. "What do you mean?" "They're debating whether to retire him or put him down." Silence. Jake stepped closer. "Say that again." "He's damaged. Holloway, you saw the state he's in. The military doesn't keep animals. They can't redeploy. He's canine property." Jake's fists clenched. "He's not property. He's my partner." Reeves didn't flinch. "I suggest you get yourself together. You're a soldier, act like one." Jake's voice dropped. "I am acting like one. And if Valor's fate comes down to a committee of men who have never seen a firefight, I'll go over every one of their heads, all the way to the Pentagon if I have to." The colonel turned without another word, but Jake knew then. This wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about saving Valor from the system he'd served so loyally. By day 5, Valor started moving again. Not much, but enough. He opened both eyes, licked Ramos's hand, tried to stand but collapsed. Jake supported him gently. "Easy, buddy. You've done enough for 10 lifetimes." He whispered into the dog's ear, voice cracking. "But I need you to fight just a little longer." And Valor did. The next day, he stood without help. The day after that, he walked just 3 steps. Jake filmed it, sent it to his sister, an animal rights lawyer back home. The message read, "If they try to retire him the wrong way, I'm coming for them." With footage, she replied instantly, "Get me everything. I'll handle the rest." 2 weeks passed. Valor had gained 8 pounds. His coat began growing back. He barked again, hoarse but strong. The story began to leak beyond the base. A medic posted a blurred photo of Jake sleeping beside the dog. It went viral. The caption read, "He ran 40 miles to find one man, and that man never left his side." Suddenly, emails poured in from journalists. A retired Marine offered to adopt Valor if needed. A senator's aide contacted Jake requesting details, but not everyone was happy. Colonel Reeves called Jake into his office again. "Your dog is creating a problem." Jake sat down calmly. "He's a hero. Heroes tend to make noise." Reeves slid a paper across the table. "They're accelerating his retirement. He'll be flown to a holding facility in Germany for evaluation. If deemed non-operational, he'll be euthanized within 30 days. Jake's stomach turned. "No," he said flatly. "I won't let that happen." Reeves leaned in. "You don't have a choice." Jake stood. "I do." That night, Jake packed a small bag. He walked into the med unit, where Valor lay sleeping. Gently, he clipped the dog's collar back into place. Valor's eyes opened, tired but alert. "You trust me?" Jake whispered. Valor licked his hand once. "Good." Together, under the cover of night, they left the base. Jake knew the desert better than most. He'd mapped it a dozen times in training. With the help of a local interpreter who owed him a favor, he made it across the border into Jordan within 3 days. Then to Amman, then a cargo flight home. It was illegal, and dangerous. But Jake didn't care, because Valor had run 40 miles through hell to return to him. Now it was his turn. By the time they landed in Virginia, the media had exploded. Canine hero disappears from military base with handler. AWOL sergeant accused of smuggling dog from war zone. Public outcry grows over possible execution of military dog. And then on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Jake stood on the steps of the courthouse. Valor by his side, both wrapped in an American flag. "We don't leave our own behind," he told the cameras. "And I'm here to prove that includes the ones with 4 legs." The Pentagon blinked. Under pressure from veterans groups, lawmakers, and hundreds of thousands of online signatures, a statement was released. Valor K9 of the 118th Recon Division will be officially retired and released to Sergeant Holloway as his permanent handler. All charges against SGT Holloway are dropped. Jake and Valor were free, and for the first time in weeks, Jake cried. Not because they had won, but because Valor had survived. That evening, as they sat on the porch of Jake's small home in rural Virginia, with cicadas buzzing and the smell of pine in the air, Jake looked down at Valor, who now rested beside his boots, one ear flicking lazily. "You're home, buddy." Valor looked up, then slowly, gently placed his head on Jake's foot. He was safe, he was free, and he was home. It had been 4 months since Jake Holloway and Valor came home, 4 months since the cameras left. The articles stopped printing, and the noise of the world faded into the quiet woods of rural Virginia. The farmhouse Jake inherited from his grandfather had never seen this kind of loyalty walk through its doors. But now, the place felt different. Alive, whole. Valor had adjusted well mostly. His limp had faded, though not completely. Some nights he still twitched in his sleep, whining softly, legs jerking as if running. Jake would wake instantly, roll off the couch, and crouch beside him, hand pressed gently to the shepherd's chest until the trembling stopped. "You're not there anymore," he'd whisper. "You're home." But Jake wasn't always sure he believed it himself. The army had offered him a medical discharge. After everything, they called it honorable, under duress. He took it. Valor's retirement was sealed. They were both free men now, but with freedom came silence. And silence, as Jake quickly learned, could be brutal. Mornings were structured. Jake would wake at dawn, make coffee, and feed Valor by hand. The dog no longer needed help eating, but Jake insisted. It was their ritual, a form of quiet gratitude. They'd walk the back trail that ran behind the property, through the tall trees and overgrown fields. Sometimes Jake would speak, often he wouldn't. Valor never seemed to mind. But when the sun set, the memories crept in. The blast, the blood, the moment he thought Valor was gone for good. And the moment he found him, collapsed at the base gate, still carrying that torn sleeve in his mouth. Jake hadn't thrown the sleeve away. He kept it in a wooden box beside his bed. Sometimes he took it out just to remember why he still believed in things like miracles. One afternoon, Jake drove into town for supplies. Valor sat in the passenger's seat like he always did, ears perked, head out the window. But when they pulled into the parking lot of the hardware store, a man stepped out of his truck and stared. "That your dog?" he asked. Jake hesitated. "Yeah, that's Valor, the one from the news." Jake nodded, unsure where this was going. The man smirked. "Should have left him overseas. I heard he cost the taxpayers $1 million. Jake felt something tighten in his chest. Valor, sensing the tension, stood taller. "Funny thing about value," Jake said calmly. "It's only obvious to people who have a soul." He turned away, walked into the store, and didn't look back. But later that night, as he sat on the porch, with Valor's head resting on his boot again, he couldn't shake the words. "Cost the taxpayers $1 million. The VA therapist lived 40 miles away in Roanoke. Jake didn't want to go. But Valor had been limping again. Turned out it was phantom pain, the vet said, common in injured working dogs. That word, phantom, stuck with him. So Jake made the appointment. The therapist's name was Ellie Turner. Early 40s, warm smile. Wore hiking boots instead of heels. Didn't flinch when Jake mentioned Valor had run 40 miles through a war zone to bring him a torn sleeve. Instead, she asked, "And what did that sleeve mean to you?" Jake blinked. "What? The sleeve? It wasn't random. Why did Valor choose that?" He hadn't thought about it. "I don't know," he admitted. Ellie tilted her head. "Maybe he didn't bring it for you." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" "Maybe he brought it for himself. A piece of you, something he could carry when everything else around him exploded." Jake sat in silence. She added gently, "Sometimes dogs don't just survive for us, they survive with us." He left the session in silence. But that night, he walked into his bedroom, opened the box, and took out the torn sleeve. He placed it beside Valor's bed, and when the dog laid his head down and slowly inched his paw over the fabric, Jake understood. Ellie had been right. Valor wasn't just saving Jake. He had carried that piece of him, because Jake was his anchor too. 1 week later, they were at the dog park, on the edge of town. A few kids were playing, laughing, tossing a ball. Valor stood back at first, alert but calm. Then one of the boys dropped his crutches. Before Jake could react, Valor moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just intentional. He picked up the crutches and brought them back to the boy, gently placing them at his feet. The park fell silent. Then applause broke out. One of the parents came up to Jake, tears in her eyes. "Is he a service dog?" Jake nodded. "The best I've ever known." She touched his arm. "Would you ever consider visiting the hospital in town? There are kids who'd love to meet him." Jake hesitated. He looked down at Valor, who wagged his tail once, just once. Maybe this was it. Not a second chance for Jake, but a second mission for Valor. He looked back at the woman and said, "Yeah, we'd be honored." And for the first time, since the blast, Jake felt like they weren't just surviving anymore, they were becoming, together. At first, the hospital visits were just once a week. Jake would load Valor into the truck and drive to the children's wing of Ridgewell Regional Medical Center. The kids knew him instantly, the dog who came back from war. But they didn't treat him like a soldier. They treated him like something magical. Some called him Captain Courage. Others said he was a superhero in disguise. One little girl whispered that he could smell fear and chase it away. Jake didn't try to explain the science of canine training. He just let Valor walk slowly down the hallway, letting small hands pet his ears, scratch behind his jaw. His tail wagged, softly. No barking, no flinching. Just calm, purposeful, as if he knew why he was there. And Jake began to smile again. Not all the time. Not the way he used to before Afghanistan. But enough to feel human. Enough to believe in tomorrow. The hospital's director soon reached out about making Valor an official therapy dog. Jake wasn't sure at first. Valor had been a warrior, a tracker, a machine of precision, under fire. Could he really be retrained to be something gentler? Then he looked down at his partner, curled on the couch with a child's stuffed toy in his mouth, a gift from one of the patients. Yes. Valor wasn't becoming something new. He was revealing something that had always been inside him. They signed the papers. Valor was now officially retired military and newly certified therapy canine. Jake bought him a new vest, this one blue instead of black. It read working dog, please ask to pet on one side, and therapy canine, Valor on the other. Jake had to blink twice when he saw it for the first time. It felt right. Then came the reporter. She showed up one sunny afternoon, just as Jake was helping a young boy named Eli climb down from a wheelchair to sit beside Valor. Sergeant Holloway, she asked, holding a notepad and flashing her press badge. Samantha Brandt, veteran voices weakly. Jake straightened, shielding the boy gently. Not doing interviews right now. She smiled. I understand. I'm not here to dig. I'm here to thank you. Jake hesitated. You were willing to lose your freedom for a dog, she said. That's not something we see every day. Jake softened slightly. She glanced at Valor. But I heard the Army still hasn't closed your case. Jake's face darkened. What case? She checked her notes. Internal audit. Military property protocol violation. There's talk that you technically stole government property. Even though they dropped the criminal charges, the paperwork is still hanging. Jake clenched his jaw. They want the vest back. They can pry it off my cold, dead hands. Samantha paused. I'm only telling you because I think you deserve to know. Some people up top, they don't like being made to look soft. Jake looked down at Valor, who was resting his chin on Eli's knee. Eyes half closed. He remembered the general silence from command, the way the military had let the PR storm pass. But never apologized for almost killing the dog who saved his life. They'll have to come through me, Jake muttered. Again, that night, Jake barely slept. He lay in bed, Valor curled beside him, the sleeve box still sitting in its place by the lamp. He opened it again, touched the torn cloth. What more did they want? He'd served blood-lost friends, watched Valor nearly die, and now they wanted to audit that loyalty. Jake knew the system, knew how bureaucracy worked. Somewhere, buried in a desk drawer in Washington, someone had circled a line item, Canine Unit, ASSET MIA, and to someone who had never seen war, Valor was a number, an unreturned vest, an unauthorized transfer. But to Jake, he was the reason he was alive. 3 days later, a letter arrived, thick sealed in official government envelope. Jake read it on the porch. Valor at his side. It was what he feared. The Department of Defense was initiating an internal review. The language was careful. Words like asset retention, protocol breach, and possible violation of reallocation procedures. At the bottom, in small print, all physical gear and accompanying animals listed in previous military contracts remain government property until formally released. Jake stood up, walked inside, grabbed his phone and called Ellie, VA therapist. They're trying to take him, he said, voice hoarse. She didn't ask who they was, she just said, then we don't let them. By the end of the week, Ellie had called her cousin on, animal rights lawyer in D.C. Jake reached out to his sister again. Samantha Brandt, the reporter, published a new article titled, He Carried a Sleeve 40 Miles Through a War. Now the government wants him back. The story exploded. Veterans groups, rescue organizations, and even a few celebrities took notice. Social media lit up. One tweet read, This is what loyalty looks like. Not a number. Not a piece of gear. A living soul who gave everything. Hashtag let Valor. Jake watched it all from the porch. He didn't want fame. He just wanted them to stop. To let him and Valor live the quiet life they fought so hard to earn. That night, as thunder rolled across the Virginia hills, Jake looked down at his dog sleeping, peacefully, at his feet, and he whispered, Whatever it takes. I won't lose you again. The courthouse in Roanoke wasn't grand or intimidating, just a boxy brick building with faded flags fluttering outside and a row of people half asleep on a Monday morning. But when Jake Holloway stepped through the doors with Valor at his side, silence followed them like a tide. He wore a black button-down shirt and jeans. Valor, in his therapy vest, walked slow but proud, each step deliberate. The bailiff at the security gate didn't ask them to stop, just gave a slow nod and let them pass. Inside, Ellie Turner waited with Jake's sister Maren, who held a thick folder under her arm. Ellie gave Jake a small, tense smile. You ready? Jake didn't respond. He looked down at Valor. The dog sat, tail resting gently on the floor, eyes calm. Jake said quietly, I follow his lead. The hearing wasn't criminal, it was a property dispute. That's what made it even more grotesque. The Department of Defense hadn't charged Jake with theft. They hadn't tried to court-martial him, not directly. Instead, they used a buried clause in canine protocol that stated all working dogs were government property until their retirement was formally ratified, paperwork that, conveniently, hadn't been filed when Jake and Valor fled the war zone. So the case was simple. To them, Valor was not a partner, not a survivor. He was an asset, misappropriated. They wanted him returned or worse, handed to a federal holding facility while ownership was reviewed. Jake sat in the courtroom as a military legal representative read aloud from a file, using words like protocol deviation, breach of transfer chain, and operational status uncertainty. Jake's jaw clenched. Across the aisle, Marin scribbled furious notes. Valor sat at Jake's feet. Unmovian G. When it was Jake's turn to speak, the judge gave him 5 minutes. Jake stood. He didn't look at the military rep. He didn't even look at the judge. He looked at Valor. This dog saved 12 soldiers in 3 years. He detected 17 IEDs, 4 snipers, and pulled me out of the dirt when I couldn't move after an ambush. He was more than just a partner. He was my conscience when I stopped trusting my own decisions. The courtroom was silent. Jake continued, voice raw but steady. When our convoy was hit, and I thought he was dead, I wanted to die too, but he didn't die. He ran 40 miles through the desert alone, wounded, to bring back a torn piece of my sleeve, something that smelled like me, something to hold onto. He paused. They say he's property, but no piece of property would have done what he did. He turned to the judge. You can take him. You can rip him from the only life he knows, from the only man he trusts. But if you do that, just admit one thing before you sign the order. You're not doing it for protocol. You're doing it because you're too afraid to admit this dog has more heart than most men. The judge didn't respond. He just nodded and took the case under review. Back outside, the press swarmed him. Jake ignored the cameras. He crouched beside Valor. You did good, bud. Valor nuzzled his hand once, then leaned into him. Jake didn't say another word. He just sat on the courthouse steps, a hand resting on the dog's shoulder, both of them waiting. Together that night, Jake didn't go home. He parked the truck at a lookout point just beyond Blue Ridge Pass. The city lights flickered beneath them, and the stars above were the only witnesses to their silence. He unrolled a blanket in the truck bed. Valor curled beside him. No words, no distractions. Just breath. Heartbeats. End history. At some point in the middle of the night, Valor lifted his head and let out a low, unfamiliar sound. Not a growl, not a bark, a sigh. Jake turned his head. I know, boy, he whispered. They don't get it. He placed his forehead gently against Valor's. But we don't stop, ever. 3 days passed, no word from the judge. Jake filled the hours walking Valor through the forest trails. He chopped wood, fixed the back fence, cooked 1 meal a day. At night, he sat by the fire pit and read from a book of old war stories. Valor listened like he understood every word. Then the phone call came. Marin answered first. Jake watched her face. A tear rolled down her cheek. She nodded, said, "Thank you, Your Honor," and hung up. She turned to Jake. "It's over." Jake froze. "What do you mean they ruled in your favor?" He didn't move. "Valor is yours. Fully, legally, forever." Jake's chest collapsed with a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for months. His knees nearly buckled. Then Valor trotted over, brushing his shoulder against Jake's thigh, like he could feel the weight lift from the air. Jake dropped to the ground, buried his face in the fur of his partner. "You're free," he whispered, and then we're free. The headlines hit the next day. Canine Valor wins his freedom. Military drops case. After public pressure, soldier and dog reunited for good. A new era for retired working dogs. But none of that mattered to Jake. Because freedom wasn't in the papers, it was in the way. Valor now trotted through town without a leash, stopping to let kids hug him, stopping by the cafe where the owner left out 2 bowls, one of water, one of turkey slices. It was in the way. Old veterans nodded when they passed, tapping their hats in respect, and it was in the way. Jake finally slept a full night. No nightmares, no panic. Just peace. Ellie came to visit a week later. She brought Valor a new therapy badge, one made from stitched leather with his name engraved by hand. Jake took it and stared for a long time. "It suits him," Ellie said. Jake nodded. "Yeah, he's not a soldier anymore." "Neither are you," she said quietly. Jake smiled. "That part's harder, but not impossible," she added. She stood and walked to the porch edge, looking out at the hills. "You know, there's a conference in Boston next month. Veterans and animal therapy experts from around the country. They're looking for speakers." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You want me to speak?" "I want both of you to." Jake hesitated, then looked at Valor. The dog tilted his head, as if waiting. Jake laughed softly. "Guess we've still got work to do, huh?" That night, Jake opened the wooden box by his bed. Inside, next to the sleeve, he placed Valor's retired black tactical vest, folded neatly. It no longer belonged on his body because Valor wasn't in battle anymore. He was home, and finally, so was Jake. The Boston conference was held in a sprawling convention center, not far from the waterfront. It was colder than Jake expected, whined, biting through his coat as he stepped from the rideshare van. Valor trotting calmly at his side. They hadn't been in a city this big since they left the military. Valor's eyes scanned the crowd instinctively, but his steps never wavered. Inside, the auditorium was packed. Veterans, animal therapists, journalists, even a few school groups. The story of the soldier and his dog had traveled far, and now it wasn't just a story, it was a movement. A new initiative had launched across 3 states, pushing for permanent adoption rights for canine handlers. And Jake's testimony was a key reason why. He didn't want the spotlight he never had. But Valor belonged there not for attention, but because his quiet strength gave people something no news article ever could: hope. They were scheduled last the keynote, what he carried back. Jake stood at the side of the stage, heart pounding like it hadn't in months. Valor sat beside him, alert and focused, his blue therapy vest neat and snug. The host gave them a brief introduction. There was applause, then silence. Jake stepped up to the mic. 4 years ago, I was deployed overseas with a partner who never once left my side. When a bomb tore through our convoy, I thought he was gone, but he wasn't. He ran 40 miles through the desert, wounded and alone, to bring back a piece of me. He held up the faded piece of sleeve, now kept in a clear frame. This, right here, this is what loyalty looks like. The room was silent. Jake continued, voice calm but steady. They tried to take him from me, said he was property, that he didn't belong to me. But what I've learned is this: you can't own loyalty, you can only earn it. He crouched beside Valor and looked directly into his eyes. And if I had to do it all over again, risk my life, my freedom, my future, I would. Because this dog didn't save my life once. He does it every single day. Applause thundered through the room. Jake didn't flinch. He just placed his hand gently on Valor's shoulder. That was enough. The next few weeks flew by. Interviews, podcasts, a featured documentary in the works. Jake found himself stepping into a role he never asked for: advocate, spokesperson, even guest instructor at training programs for PTSD and service dog pairings. He was grateful. But it was Valor who made everything possible at home. They kept things simple: mornings on the trail, afternoons at the local children's hospital, evenings watching the stars. Until the call came. It was from Sergeant Mason, old friend from his last deployment. Jake, it's about Bravo unit. Jake froze. Talk to me, he said. There was an ambush outside Kandahar, 3 K9 South missing, 1 handler and critical. Jake's stomach turned, and one of the dogs broke from the convoy. Injured, disappeared into the hills. Locals say they spotted him tracking west toward the outpost. It's been 4 days, no contact. Jake closed his eyes. What's his name? Chief. Jake swallowed. Chief was one of Valor's last trainees before they left, younger, fierce, bright-eyed and stubborn. Mason hesitated. The Pentagon's not sending anyone. Not yet. It's complicated, but the locals don't have the training. And the dog might not survive another night. Jake looked down at Valor, who had stood up, tail low, head tilted, as if he knew. That night, Jake sat on the porch, fire crackling beside him. You've done enough, buddy, he said quietly. You owe nobody anything. But Valor just stepped forward, pressed his head into Jake's chest. Not for permission, but an answer. They both knew. 2 days later, they landed in a military chopper, just outside the edge of Helmand Province. Jake's stomach churned from the altitude, but Valor didn't move. He stood like a statue, his breath slow, his eyes focused. The tactical vest returned not black, but dark gray, with a simple patch. Volunteer support. No dog left behind. Landscape was brutal. Steep hills, loose gravel, and unfamiliar scents. But Jake had maps. Valor had his nose. Together, they moved with precision through a dry riverbed and into the outskirts of an abandoned village. And then not stopped. He sniffed the air once, twice, then bolted. Jake followed, heart in his throat. They crested a ridge. On the other side, beneath a collapsed stone arch, lay a figure, a German shepherd, covered in dust, limping but alive. Jake crouched, chiefed the dog, lifted his head, tail wagging weakly, and Valor. He didn't bark. He simply approached slowly and lay down beside him, side by side, brother to brother. Jake choked back a tear, because in the end, it wasn't about heroism. It was about never leaving anyone behind. They flew home 3 days later, Chief between them, the mission complete. Silence, peaceful, and the bond unbreakable. 3 years later, a bronze statue stood at the gates of Ridgewell Veterans Park. It showed a soldier crouched beside a German shepherd, both looking ahead, alert and steady. The plaque read, in honor of Canine Valor, who ran 40 miles through war just to come home. Jake visited every year on the same day. He didn't speak much, just laid a single dog tag at the base. Valor had passed peacefully, in his sleep, 2 springs ago. No pain, no fear, just rest. Jake held him until his last breath. But Valor's work never stopped. Hospitals still played videos of his visits. Therapists still told his story. And soldiers still whispered his name when they needed courage. Because some dogs don't just protect lives, they change them. Forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who loves stories of courage and loyalty. Let Valor's legacy live on.